Hey all, so I thought I would explain the poetry collection assignment to you. Um, I haven't had a lot of questions on it, but I want to make sure that everyone kind of understands it. So what you're doing with this final collection is it's not just the analysis of the poems that you're putting in this collection. It's really about like what connects these poems together. So imagine yourself in a position where you can put a book together of poems that you like, and you're giving to other people in some way. So you need to explain why you put those poems together. So you should have a title because it should feel like a collection, and a collection of poems has a title, an anthology of poems has a title. The title should obviously, try to be creative, but try to also explain what your collection's about. I'll show you a good title here in a second with some student examples. Um, you need to include at least 10 poems. They can be from the book or outside of class. Don't pick more than 20. If you have a reason that you want to, uh, that's fine, but try your best to limit yourself so that you can really focus in on the poems you do pick. So then the introduction is 1,000 words. Why are they together? What are they? How are they working together? What are they telling us about a theme or an idea, or what's the reason you put these together? um, Carefully format them as well. Most poems you can get online, especially from the book, obviously. So some things to keep in mind would just be make sure that you're formatting them correctly. So look at the original and do your best to replicate that. Because, like, obviously, if you had like an E. E. Cummings poem, um, E. E. Cummings plays around with space a lot, so you have to get the space right to preserve the intention of the poem. So just keep that in mind. So the main questions all kind of relate to that idea of like what makes it a collection, right? So what are the threads and themes? How do you justify putting together? What are the different mechanics or literary devices that they share, right? So like maybe a couple of them are sonnets. Like what do the sonnets have to do with each other? Like what is it trying to accomplish using that method of writing? Yeah, how do the meanings feel connected? Why do they need to be put together? Again, they're all sort of going around the same idea. Um, so I put an example here connecting the poem Chicago by Carl Sandburg to Come On Feel It, Illinois by Sufjan Stevens. Stevens, yeah, and you can use songs. It's totally fine too. Songs are poems. Um, if you're unsure of what a poem is, you can just definitely just ask me. If you have something in mind that's creative, go for it. Like I want you to show off your, talent and creativity. Um, Make sure the title, the author, and the date. And if the date's not there, that's fine. But make sure that stuff is um, consistent throughout. So make sure that your font is the same. Make sure, unless you're doing it stylistically for some reason, we'll again see an example of that. Make sure, yeah, grammar and punctuation stays the same, that the author intended that. Make a font that's readable, etc. You can read through this. So basically, I'll be grading you on a few different things. How well connected are the poems through your introduction? Um, did they create meaning and understanding together? Um, and then specificity would be like, were you specific in your introduction using parts of the poems as examples? Was there anything that needed to be explained? Consistency in styles, like the formatting, right? And then grammar and polishing is just like, does it feel like a final piece of work? Does it feel like it's ready to be published? Um, I'm open to extra credit, so if you want to include some artwork, photography, you reading the poems, like whatever you want to do, I'm totally down. Just call me, or not call me, just email me, let me know exactly what you want to do. If you're worried about that or you have an idea, I've already got a couple emails from people asking. So it's always good to just clear clear it, um, just to make sure that you're like on the right track. All right, I want to show you some examples. So this first example, I'll kind of give the goods and the bads. So the good, one of the things I like is I like the title because it in the introduction she goes through and like talks about nature with humanity and how we're often at odds with that or like commercializing nature and how mankind kind of butts up to that. Yeah, what conflict is there, that sort of thing. Right, human nature, like she plays around with a lot of these ideas. um, this is really short as an introduction, but what she did was in between the poems themselves she wrote more connective tissue, more connecting paragraphs to kind of show the flow of things. You could definitely do that. I had a question from someone on like putting the poems together in certain ways and then connecting them through like smaller chunks of like an introduction. You could definitely do that. The introduction can, flow throughout. So like your words can kind of flow throughout. Just don't try to sit there and explain the poems in the same way that you've been reflecting on them. Like, don't sit there and be like, I think that, like, this is what's happening. Like, that's not what this is for, unless it's related to your theme or idea. So, like, an example in here is like, I find that the speakers in these poems demonstrate a fundamental component of human nature, the desire to understand. She's not just talking about one specific poem, she's putting that thought into what makes this a collection. Like, how do these poems fit together? Then she goes into specific examples of the speaker, but she makes that move to say, like, it's not just this one. And then the second example, one thing I didn't really like is there was no title. So make sure that you have a title. I think there could have been a lot here to play with. Um, this was a writer that connected his life of like living in the city with poems about Chicago, and about family. Like I really enjoyed how personal he made this project. Um, I do wish he had like a little bit more references to the poems, though he gets to it more towards the end here. This will be up under the video if you want to look at it. This last one, I like this like theme, this idea of I don't know, sadness or loneliness and being lost. Like I think those things can go hand in hand, but they're also a little different. So I like that she combined more than one idea into her theme. Um, I like the idea that she kind of drew into two of the poems and talked about like why they fit together. Um, these examples aren't perfect, but I feel like they have a pretty good understanding of um, what makes a collection a collection. So they have the central theme or idea. There's some personal like thought that goes into it. So like similar to your reflections, if you went that direction. But it's really about putting these poems into like a book. And obviously you're probably just submitting them as a document, but I want you to feel like I could present this to someone in a book and it would make sense as a book. Um, so if you have any other specific questions, you could let me know, but that's just kind of quick run through of the assignment. Um, this should feel like the culmination of everything we've done. So I know that sounds like a lot, but I feel like you want to make sure that you're putting your best work forward, especially because we don't have a lot of time after this. So like You're not going to really be given a lot of time to revise if you don't kind of hit the mark. So from what I've seen on everyone's posts, everyone's in a good place. Like I've been, commenting if something's been, if you, it's like, oh, this wasn't that detailed. I kind of commented and told you what you need to work on. But if you have specific questions, like you can always reach out to me. Um, I just want you to think of this collection as like your final impression in class of like, here's what I took out of some of the poems from the book. And again, you don't have to have them all from the book or anything. But kind of like what poems stuck out to you? What poems inspire you to make a collection out of them? So you can imagine any kind of scenario you want. You could do something like, oh, if I had 10 or 12 poems to take with me outside of this class, like which ones would I pick? Like what central idea or theme connects them all? Like we tend to have our preferences and biases when it comes to the poems we like. So like start to identify what's making them work in the same way. Poems that I gravitate to tend to be about like nature and shorter, and they tend to speak to like yeah, close to like our first example of like our connection to nature and how um, mankind influences that. I really like when there's like a rusty boat next to the water kind of poems. So I would probably pick something in that same vein as the nature collection. Um, and yet I would probably pick a bunch of different ones than she picked. So even if you have a similar idea as someone else, you're going to take it in a completely different direction. So I'm excited to see what you all have. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully you found this video informative. All right, bye.